Today we're going to be talking about pronation and supination, but probably from a somewhat different perspective. If you would like me, and most people I know, if not everybody I know, you was taught pronation and supination from hind foot, midfoot, forefoot. But this isn't the most intuitive way of doing this, and it's also really not the way the foot moves. We're going to be looking at this from medial foot to lateral foot. And you'll see why this is as we go through it. But I think it is more intuitive. When I first heard it explained this way, like decades and decades ago, I went, oh, I understand this now. In all honesty, I really didn't understand how the foot works until this explanation for it. So I'm forever grateful to the person who did that. And I think it was Earl Petman, but I wouldn't swear to it. So this is what we're going to be doing on this discussion. First, let's get some terms out of the way. Inversion and eversion, as far as whether each is medial or lateral rotation. The best way I can do this for myself, and I have to do this periodically, is if I put my leg out straight, knee extended, ankle plantar flex, because when you put the foot into its normal anatomical position, it's 90 degrees to the rest of the leg, and that makes it difficult. But if you point your toes, then everything's in the same line, and you can see what's happening. So if I now invert my foot, what you can see, it's in the sense of rotation, the same rotation as when I laterally rotate my leg. If I evert the foot, then the leg medially rotates. The whole leg, everything in the leg medially rotates. So inversion of the foot is lateral rotation of all the bones involved in the inversion, while eversion is medial rotation of all the bones involved in eversion. Now, inversion versus supination. These are not the same by any means. What you can see with these lines is the line depicts the plane of the foot, essentially. If you took a cross section through the foot, that's what that plane would be. And what you can see here is that with inversion, the whole foot rotates in the same direction. Every one of those bones is laterally rotating. The top of the foot remains the same breadth. Nothing changes in the foot. It doesn't twist on itself. With supination, though, it's completely different. The lateral foot goes in one direction, the medial foot goes in another direction. So one side is inverting, one side is everting. The other difference between these two movements is similar to pronation and eversion, is that inversion is an active movement, or it can be an active movement. So I can volitionally produce inversion. To produce supination, I don't have a muscle that can fold the foot that way. So this is done by body weight, and the foot folds on itself, does that. And pronation, which we'll see in a minute, it does that. So it's a folding movement and a fanning movement, or if you like, a twisting movement and a flattening movement. But this is the difference between the two. Pronation and eversion. Eversion very similar to supination in that the foot does not change planes. So we've got that blue line showing the general plane of the foot, and everything involved in eversion medially rotates. Well, with pronation, we've got half the foot, more or less half the foot supinating, inverting, half the foot everting. So what you can see is with pronation, the medial foot will invert and the lateral foot will evert. And again, pronation cannot be done actively. You don't have a pronator footies, the same as you've got a pronator teres. There is no muscle that can do this, and it's body weight splitting that foot so it rotates around this particular axis. And there's the axis. It separates the medial foot and the lateral foot. The lateral foot consists of the calcaneum, the cuboid, the lateral two metatarsals and their phalanges, their toes, while the medial foot is the rest of the bone, basically the talus, the navicular, the three cuneiforms, the three metatarsals and their phalanges. And that split is a functional split. And in fact, one of these joints, the cubonavicular joint, is actually a syndesmosis, and it allows the foot to spread a bit as you do this. So the whole thing is developed so that you can spread the foot when you weight bear. The other interesting thing here is that pronation actually tightens up all of the plantar ligaments. So this actually is a close packed position. Ligamentously, this is a close packed position. But coming up on your toes, you get maximum congruency of the joint surfaces, and you get a second stable position. So one is a ligamentous close pack, and the other one is an articular close pack. So these are the movements around the axis, and the arrows depict that movement. Pronation, inversion of the medial foot, eversion, and eversion of the lateral foot, supination, eversion of the lateral foot, and inversion of the medial foot. Sorry, eversion of the medial foot and inversion of the lateral foot, the exact opposite of supination. This is the way the weights and forces sort of transfer across. Your initial impact on the lateral calcaneal tubercle basically everts the calcanea, so you can see that on the heel strike. As you come onto midfoot and forefoot, then you get movement down the lateral side of the foot, and then that transfers across as you come over the top of the foot to the medial side. And then on toe off, you get ground reaction forces, body reaction forces, and the heel comes off, and you get the supination that goes along with that. So if we now we put this all together and look at how the weight is transferred through the foot and the biomechanics in the foot as you actually do weight bear. So you heel strike on the lateral calcaneal tubercle, which is developed in humans and not developed in other great apes. Nobody else heel strikes on the lateral foot. So as you heel strike, laterally heel strike, your leg is laterally rotated and you are in inversion, inversion and dorsiflexion of the ankle and the foot. You strike there. Essentially, the calcaneus comes to a stop, but the talus is able to move on. One of the effects of laterally rotating your foot or your leg as you hit is that the plane of the talocalcaneal joint, which is anteromedial, posterolateral, lines up anterior and posterior because of that lateral rotation, and it allows the talus to glide forward via inertia. Basically, just you're moving forward and the talus keeps moving while the calcaneus stops. That produces subtalar eversion, which close packs that joint. It also produces calcaneocuboid inversion as the calcaneus comes underneath it and basically everts that joint. So this helps stabilize the cuboid, so it can now act as a fairly efficient pulley for the peroneus longus, and the peroneus longus contracts and pulls down on the first metatarsal head, brings that down to the ground, and at the same time shifts your body weight medially. So the weight runs up the lateral foot. They've got this, I think they've got this red line going a little bit too early, but it runs up the lateral foot. All that dark skin is weight-bearing skin, by the way. So it runs up the lateral foot, hits the fifth metatarsal tubercle, which is massive, and then shifts your weight across to the metatarsal. So the fifth metatarsal takes a weight of the weight going through it, but the other metatarsals don't, and then you come on to the first metatarsal head. Now, while all this is happening, the tibia and fibula, the cruis, is still going anteriorly, and if you like, it's plantar flexing on the talus, coming over the top of the talus. So now the ankle is coming into dorsiflexion, which is come towards its close packed position, and then the talus is rotated. The cruis acts as a pincher on the talus, rotates the talus medially and depresses the head. It pushes that down. So the head goes inferiorly on the navicular, which relatively speaking is going dorsal and lateral, which is its close packed position. And then that force is passed through to the cuneiforms, which do the same thing as the navicular flaccid, go dorsal and lateral, so that close packs on their metatarsals. And eventually it will come to the first metatarsal, which is already stabilized by peroneus pulling it down. So the weight is transferred from the back to the front laterally and then medially. And then the heel comes off, That unclosed pack's a subtalar joint, unclosed pack's a the calcaneoclavicular joint, and then each joint in turn is taken out of that ligamentous closed pack as the heel comes up further and further up. And then you come onto the metatarsal bases and the foot reclosed packs into its articular closed pack position on near toe off. As soon as the foot comes off the ground, then you go back to inversion and eversion as opposed to pronation and supination until the foot comes back on the ground again. So I'm hoping this will be a little bit easier to understand, make more sense, more intuitive sense than hindfoot, midfoot, forefoot. And if it doesn't, stick with the one you've got. But I think if you think about this, you'll find this a bit easier to visualize and understand. Take care, everybody, and we'll talk again. Bye-bye.